Good morning and welcome to our 50 Acres webinar today. The 50 Acres Academy webinar series have been going now for probably, I'd say, more than a year. I can't exactly tell you the birthday, but we do these monthly. It's largely ended up being targeted at not-for-profits, organisations, small businesses, social entrepreneurs, startups, etc. But it's equally applicable to others. But that's sort of where the learnings end up being most valuable. Please don't hesitate to tell me if you've got any technical issues through the webinar. You can see on your control panel there's a little area there for questions. So if you've got questions, then just drop them in and I will respond to them as we progress through the discussion today. So today's a really great topic for people who inevitably don't have a lot of money to throw at social campaigning, media, PR, marketing, etc. We work a lot in the not-for-profit space, as I think probably most of you know, and what we tend to have is conversations with people who, inevitably will come to us and say, there's a whole bunch of issues that they're managing, that they want to attend to, but inevitably they don't. The end of the conversation, we then talk about what sort of budget they have. And most people, as you would appreciate with not-for-profits, money doesn't come, it doesn't grow on trees, and it's a very scarce resource and it needs to be spent very wisely. And so budgets are always tight, and often having the option of doing some of the work yourself is a really good thing. So today's webinar is really meant to be focusing on that exactly, and letting people know some things, some techniques that they can use, some tips, tricks, activities, approaches to media and PR pitching that you can use to make it cost effective for you, either on a no budget or on a low budget, really. So that's where we're focusing today. So, and again, as I said, if people have got questions, just pop them in the box and we will get to them as we progress. So I suppose what I would say to begin with, before we go any further, like anything in this world, inevitably, if you are willing to learn some new skills and you're prepared to do a little bit of work, you should be able to do this stuff, or a lot of it, yourselves. It's not like brain surgery. I know people use that cliche, but believe it or not, there's once a time when the best PR professional doesn't know how to do something and learns that skill for the first time. And just as a PR professional or someone who works in communications, people with a little bit of digging, a little bit of reading, a little bit of preparedness to try it again, to get it right, you can do this stuff, or a lot of it, yourself. You may not necessarily get the results that an agency might get for you first up. You might have to put a bit more legwork in, but inevitably you will learn some stuff along the way, and it might be a way of cost cutting, so that you only really call in help when you really need it for some special stuff or expert advice or strategic advice, etc. But that's what today's webinar is focused on. So let's progress. So what's the bottom line, I suppose, with do-it-yourself PR? As I said before, the preparedness to learn, a little bit of hard work, and the willingness to try it again if it doesn't work. How many of us have tried to pitch to people and, you haven't got the results that you hoped for. You thought you were sitting on this most amazing story. And I suppose that's probably the thing that I get most when I talk to clients. Everyone always thinks the thing that they're working on is amazing. And they think that they have a story, and it deserves being on the project, on the Today program, and Sunrise, all in the same week or perhaps on the same day. And inevitably, most people don't realise that cracking the project's really hard. They've got 60 people in their production team. There is a lot of stories being pitched to them. It is a lot of noise that they've got. And to get a quality story covered on the project is a great achievement. Likewise on Sunrise or the Today programs. So that's not to say don't aim high, but equally think about what it is that you really need to do and where you need to be, rather than going out with, well, that's what we're going to do. Let's be realistic. Let's be thorough about the sort of job that we can do, that we know that we'll make some gains with, and do that really well. And if, as a consequence of that, you get some coverage on some of these big programs, then that's just absolutely brilliant. So if you're wanting media coverage and actually getting it, are two different stories, obviously. So I think to begin with, I'm going to give you some broad advice, which I think helps prepare you for these sorts of, DIY pitches, but also some real sort of tips and tricks. So first of all, you need to think like a journalist and really be prepared. So you need to develop a story and build your pitch toolkit. So it's not just enough to send someone a really boring, turgid media release. It's just got details about an event. You need to think about how journalists might write the story, how they would cover the story. Listen to what they, if you've got a particular journalist in mind, listen to what they say, how they write, and write your pitch to them as they speak themselves. And it might not be that a media release is what you do. You might just send some individual emails. More often than not, that's the sort of approach that we are taking. We're taking a pitch approach, and we are sending individual approaches that are conversational in tone and are more likely to perhaps engage people in that first instance. So obviously you need to be prepared with those email lists and contact details and get those first of all. That can be easier said than done, but you can get those names and numbers and email addresses if you do a little bit of legwork. You can often get them by just putting in the person's name, John Smith, email address, The Australian, or whatever else into Google, and often it'll come up quite easily. Or you can guess if you've known one email from that particular outlet, you can pretty much make a guess. And then follow up with calls, but we'll talk about follow-up in a minute. You need to make friends. So, it's probably better to actually have introduced yourself to that person rather than just sending them an email or a pitch straight up, or media release and expecting them to cover it. If you call and say hi, just briefly, don't expect the conversation to be very long. Literally, people have huge amounts of emails in their inbox. My husband is a press gallery journalist. He's the president of the press gallery. And often on a weekend when I look at his iPhone, he'll have 900 and something emails or 800 and something emails, I kid you not, unopened in his inbox. And it's a huge amount, and he cleans them out every week. And so, that's the sort of amount of emails they're getting every week. And he cleans out other, gets rid of other ones. But, they're getting 1,000 and above emails, some of these journalists, every week. So there's a lot of stuff that they've got to sort through. They don't see it all. So if you make a phone call and they know that something's coming or they know about what you're doing, then you're probably more likely to get them to open that up and read it. Doing the work, obviously, effective coverage isn't just a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. And so that's about knowing who's in your space, who's writing about what you're doing, who might be interested in it. It's not necessarily going to be the Project or Sunrise or the Today program. It might be a particular journalist on a particular paper that you've read, or it might be a particular journalist on another program who's just got an interest in the area that you've been writing on. Google that subject area, see what comes up in the news tab of Google, and see what you get. So there's a number of ways I think that your organisation can spread the word about what you do without allocating a huge budget, I think, to the task. And an especially important consideration for startups, small business, or those in the not-for-profit sector. So what we're outlining from here is some low-cost PR and marketing ideas that are simple to implement and easy, hopefully, to maintain as well. What I talked to about before was being prepared, things to think about before you start the process of the PR pitch. And this goes back to a strategy. You don't have to have a degree in communications to think about what you might do. You're all intelligent people. We all have a day job. We're all smart enough to do something. So, you can think about it yourself. You can think about it with another person, perhaps a team, but sit down and do a brainstorm. Get some butcher's paper out and write some of this stuff up on a board or a whiteboard. Ask these questions. Who do we want to engage with? What do we want to say to them? What do we want them to do? How do we want them to respond? What's the action that we're actually asking them? If you're a corporate, it's probably about sales or business growth. If it's a not-for-profit, it's inevitably about getting them to do something, taking action, perhaps donating. So what are the things that you're wanting them to do as a consequence of the communications with them? How can you achieve that? How do you want to communicate to them? So sometimes, PR is obviously PR isn't something just in and of itself. PR is about reaching your target audience. You've always got to think about where it's going to lead you. It's not just something that you can show to your board or your boss. It's about actually getting something achieved by that. So what is it that you need to do? How are you going to get there? What are the risks in what you're doing? That's always really important to have a think about. I think it's gone are the times where you can just sort of blasely put something out. If you're being irreverent, think about how you manage your tone of voice online. This sort of stuff can be taken out of context. Moreover, it might be something that might be an issue or some sort of crisis issue that's implicated in it. You've just got to think about the sort of implications of some of the stuff you're doing before you just jump out there and do what you're going to do. And, as a group of people, yourself, your team, you and your boss, you and the board, ask, what does success look like for this particular PR push? Is it part of something broader? What are we trying to achieve here? And what does success look like really for us? So when you're starting this process, I think the important thing is to develop an ideas bank. And again, you don't have to have a degree in communications to think about ideas. You do that every day in your job. So some easy ways to kick goals in that space is to, get together again with your team, your next door neighbour, the desk next to you, whoever it is that you sit and talk to about this stuff to in the office. Think about various media releases or shout outs for perhaps volunteers or program participants. If it's about your startup or a low cost corporate sort of push, it's about thinking about what you're telling them to encourage them to do something, to pick up the phone and order, find out more information about what it is you're doing. Think about developing a strategic social media program. What does that look like? And that's not complicated. It's just a series of draft tweets, draft Facebook posts, perhaps using a platform like Buffer to make it really easy to do that really simply and quickly, or Hootsuite. Moving newsletters to online only. I've got a little bit more about that in a little while, but that's a really good, cheap DIY, low-budget approach in terms of communications. That can also be used to communicate to media. Creating meaningful GIFs, and again, I've got a slide a little bit further down about that, that don't necessarily have to be costly, but perhaps tapping into things that you're already doing. And in terms of online advertising, having a think about how you might do that. If you decide to do that, how to make that cost effective, and particularly advertising perhaps on blogs. We'll get to all of that a little bit later. So let's talk first of all about media initiatives themselves, media pitches themselves, and I've got a few slides here to take you through. So first of all, a media release obviously is fundamental to that, and I apologise if many of you have already done this sort of work, but this is really just taking it down to the basics. And again, it's sort of directed at not-for-profits here, but it can equally apply to corporates. So media releases obviously can be a great way of attracting the attention of potential volunteers or program participants. Volunteers, local papers are often keen to print the story when they know it's a good cause for their community. So when you know you've got an event or something coming up that deserves to be heard, simply send a media release or a pitch to your local paper or perhaps your local community radio station or to the local ABC station, letting them know about it. Because I know I live near Canberra, and every weekend there's What's On. They'll often get people on the radio to talk about what's on. It's an absolutely free kick to be able to get on and talk about what you're doing. And they'll also talk about the cause and the issue. So think about all of those sorts of what's ons. An example headline might be, X or Y seeks local volunteers to help make a difference in kids' lives or for a new mentoring program or whatever it is. And you may wish to send a profile as well, a success story from a previous program, and note a need for volunteers, that you need volunteer participants at the end of the release, almost like a call to action. Often papers will want a photo, as you probably all know, and so, excuse me for coughing, and so obviously sending a photo or having one ready to go is a really good idea, and it needs to be a decent photo. It can't be something that you would have taken on your iPhone, so probably engage someone that is a half-decent photographer with perhaps a half-decent camera that is prepared to help you. Just had a bit of a small coughing fit. So I'm just trying to get this to move. So in terms of following up, once your story's gone live and you're getting coverage, well, that's fantastic. That's success. Obviously, you've sent your media release out. You've got your media contacts. It's time to get to work and make the best out of the launch or the news story or the announcement. So the first thing that you need to do is sit down at your computer and start sending out friendly reminders after you've done the first tranche of calls or approaches. This includes, to sending them out to interested journalists that seemed promising. Obviously, they're what's called warm leads. Sending out polite reminders without putting unnecessary pressure on the writer will obviously increase the likelihood that you might get coverage from them in the future. You don't want to burn bridges. You don't want to heavy them 5 times in a couple of days, because if everyone did that, you can imagine they'd get frustrated and probably not like you anymore. It's like anything. If you get bothered by people a lot, you don't like it. It's the same thing for journalists. They're just doing a job. So what do you do then? If the media perhaps coverage has started, you're doing your follow-ups, and then some coverage has started coming in. This is really, really important in terms of how you manage it. All this stuff can be done by you. Coverage is really important, but it's also important to keep an eye on the coverage and listen to what's being said about your company or your product or your not-for-profit news story. Monitor what's going on so that you know what you've achieved. There are very expensive analytical tools you can use, but equally you can use Google Alerts or Google searches to do that. You'll be the first to know anytime your company or your not-for-profit receives media coverage or a mention. And if you use this to your advantage by keeping track of what's happening across the internet in regards to your company or your not-for-profit story, you can keep informed and totally in the loop in terms of what you're doing, and you can go up the line with that, tell your boss or the board what's going on, and obviously you'll appear to be knowledgeable about what's going on, which is fantastic. In addition to keeping informed about what's happening, it's important to get involved and be engaged in conversations about your launch or your story. And people often say this, join in the conversation online, and that seems like sort of an elusive thing, but actually That's what social media is there for. It's there so that we can actually have a conversation with people and join in and make a comment. And so don't hesitate jumping in and saying, someone's asking a question, making a comment, direct them to where they can get some more information, send them a link, do whatever else you need to do in order to keep them engaged or to at least acknowledge that they've responded. Remembering to share, I think, is really important as well. So, with every write-up, feature or a piece of coverage that comes in, make sure you take the time to share that coverage. If you keep them on side, a journalist or influencer, someone on a blog or whoever it is, took the time to write about you or the company or your not-for-profit. So really the least that you can do is to make sure, their article gets, page views, that you repost it, you refer to it in your social media feed or perhaps in your own blog post, etc., etc. It's all about sharing that, their enthusiasm, sharing the love, sharing the hits, and giving them some credible links back to what they've done, which is going to help them as well. Referring to the journalist, if you post the article on your own social media platform or on your own blog, be sure to emphasize the writer. Mention his or her Twitter name when you tweet, or tag him or her on Facebook when you post. They'll certainly appreciate the mention, and you'll help their page views, obviously, as well. We've all been there. Sorry, someone's telling me I've got 12% left on my computer. Thank you, Natasha. I think we'll be right, but that's a good point. Thank you. We've only got about another 8 slides, so we'll make sure we get there. Making sure you measure, I think, is really important as well. Don't underestimate the value of analytics tools for tracking customer sign-ups or traffic and purchasing whatever they're purchasing or their engagement, the response to your call to actions. This will give you a really good idea on which media works and which doesn't, and it helps to determine which outlets led to the greatest influx in traffic. Again, it's something that you can point to in terms of your board or your boss or your team. You can demonstrate what worked and what didn't. Of course, it's also important to remember that traffic isn't the only metric to track. It's often smaller or more niche outlets will result in a slower stream of traffic, but you need to look at the sentiment in those niche publications and niche outlets, and they'll be more targeted. They might be reaching more of the people that you're hoping to reach, and so you need to be cognizant of that when you write some sort of report. If you're still on, the fence, or you're not really sure about monitoring, just remember that, if you use Google Analytics, it's free, and it's a really great place to start. You don't have to jump in and buy expensive analytics software or subscribe to something like Meltwater, which is expensive. You can obviously do it yourself. And if you Google Public Relations Institute of Australia, metrics chart or metrics standard or something like that, they've got a really good comprehensive way of analysing and evaluating the success of PR, and that's a really good place to at least have a read about. Social media can be really effective to engage current and potential supporters in sharing your news. However, maximising the potential impact social media can have on your organisation, it's really necessary to be strategic about the platforms, content and audiences that you engage with, and to develop risk management policies and processes before you just jump out there. I often advise, you need to limit how many people are being allowed to reach out on social media. I think that's really important so that you actually know how many people are, speaking about you, because they need to be really clear about what they can and can't say, how free, and what sort of tone of voice they need to project. Alert
from system UI server.
Sorry.
Low battery.
Now Siri's even telling me Natasha, so it's okay. We'll be right. We've got 6 minutes to get through the next 8 slides, 6 slides. There are many different forms of online advertising, obviously, and we're probably all doing them. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to see if any of you are doing any of this stuff already, but online advertising is something that you may want to try. And if you were going to spend any money on your PR, online advertising and pushing into people's feeds is probably the place to start. Rather than necessarily paying people to write a whole bunch of stuff for you, paying to try and reach people and getting that right and getting that content right is probably a really good place to start. So obviously, using radio, TV and print, and if you look at some of the stats about that these days, interest levels and eyeball levels and the attention of those eyeballs in TV and print advertising is plummeting. And advertising agencies are trying to grapple with how do they get people's attention. And I've done separate webinars on the whole issue about attention and dealing with that in this disrupted marketplace. But in the context of that, in terms of DIYing stuff, exploring the options for targeting particular audiences you might want to reach. So you can be really targeted on Facebook, very targeted on Twitter. You can be very geo-targeted. You can deal with people who are interested in, parenting in 3 suburbs. You can reach them all. People who search for various things. You can do Google ads. You need to research where you think your tribe is going to be and then follow them and invest your money there. And then see what metrics that brings in. You can track their clicks really well. And that's the beauty of online advertising and online placement. You can track it far better than you can ever know what people did as a result of listening to a radio, TV, or reading a print ad. Absolutely. So I would urge you to investigate those options in terms of the DIY model. If you've got any funds at all, that's where to go with them. Online newsletters, they're a great tool and a really good low budget tool for reaching out to supporters or to your customers, but they can be expensive if you get them designed and bespoke. You can also do them yourself through MailChimp. Lots of people are on email, so consider transitioning from a print newsletter to online is a great way of saving money. Affordable platforms like MailChimp are really good. And before you commence the process, you probably need to ask people perhaps to email and opt in, or when you email them, you need to obviously be able to allow them to opt out. That's a legal requirement when you're emailing people for the first time, generally speaking, with these things. Creating meaningful gifts. So now we're sort of moving into that low budget marketing area, but this can be a great way to stay top of mind with important stakeholders. Instead of the typical pen or keyring, have a think about what gifts could say. How can they say something meaningful? Is there some stuff that you do? Is there things that people make? Do you have volunteers doing stuff? What are you trying to say? An example might be an artwork or products created by clients, or perhaps a professional photo. You can do stuff that is low budget. You don't have to spend a lot of money. So just before we finish, there's a couple of checklists that I wanted to take you through. One is just a general checklist on DIY media. First of all is knowing your story. That's really critical. You need to know what you want to say and why. Summarize your story into brief points to use in your pitches so that you don't have this little lengthy thing that people aren't going to ever read. Update your media kit and craft a winning release. Needs to be, if you got, as well as a pitch, have a release so that you've got both options. Choose your best ideal target outlets. So go niche or think about your maximum impact. You can go niche and talk about news. You may not necessarily get all the hits you want with news, but thinking about both strands is really important. Make friends before you go out. Establish those connections before you pitch with an informal, quick phone call. tailor your pitch for individual outlets. So not everything is relevant to, to a particular outlet. It might be different angles on that one story. Think about how you will write that in a pitch to people. Make sure that your pitch is relevant. Know what the hook is. What is it that you find interesting about a story? Think about it really, really, really openly and candidly. Don't just presume that because, your boss, your board has told you that, the opening of the office next week's the biggest thing since sliced bread. Really, is it going to get any coverage? It may not. Think about how you're going to bring something new to it. What's going to be the angle? What's going to excite people? Is there some news coming out of it? Is there some research coming out of it? Is there, a celebrity or an influencer that might be there that people might be interested to talk to? Then obviously securing coverage, that's the, that's the $1 million question, and that's the hardest part of it. But obviously persistence is the real key there, I think. So the checklist generally, I think, for the low budget PR and marketing is really this in many respects. Sending out local media releases about your programs, making them local is probably going to be the easiest way. And I'm not talking local as in just around the corner, but if you're in New South Wales to Sydney, if you're in Tasmania to Hobart, making it relevant rather than aiming for the top every time and being disappointed that you haven't got that coverage. Be realistic. Investigate online advertising options. I think if you're going to spend some money, that's probably going to be the best bang for the buck, basically. Developing a strategic social media program. So again, social media is free if you're investing time. So create that content around a particular initiative or a media pitch and making sure that you've got content that you can tweet or put on Facebook or post blogs about. Look to moving newsletters to email versions where possible. That'll help save a lot of money. And look at possible product marketing ideas that have a meaningful link to what you do. That carries for both corporates and also for not-for-profits. So that's it for today, everyone. If anyone's got any questions, please pop them in now. I'll just tell you about next month's Academy webinar. We're going to look at data and polling, the how, the where, and the why about these vital communications tools. I think a lot of people dabble with polling, or they're interested in it, they're interested in data, they're interested in how they can deploy it. And it's often, really confusing. How can you use data so it doesn't send people to sleep? How could you use a poll? How can you conduct your own poll online? So that's what we'll be touching on next time. I think it's a really interesting thing. Again, you can do these things quite cheaply with a little bit of research. Online polls yourself you can do for free. So, those sorts of things is what we're going to be covering next time. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us today. That's been wonderful to have you. And thank you, Natasha, for pointing out about my battery. And it's lasted, which is fantastic. I'm going to now go and plug my computer in. And have a great day, everyone. And thanks again for joining us. We will send you a link to the webinar, which will be up on our YouTube channel, 50 Acres TV, a bit later today, and also a copy of the slide pack. So thanks again, and have a great day.